So leaving a studio with a 4-day work week, like why, right? It sounds crazy to some people, but for me, it makes complete sense why. Uh, I want to share my experience, the good, the bad, and what ultimately made me leave a dream setup that on paper just looked perfect. If you're in the industry or thinking of joining a 4-day work week studio, I hope this gives you something real to think about. So what attracted me about the studio, I was working at a smaller size studio prior to joining the 4-day work week studio. I was working on mobile games, and it was quite the contrast compared to working at a AAA studio like EA. It was too different, and it just was not the vibe I was looking for. There were pros and cons, 100%. But for me, I got used to how things were done in AAA. I was having a hard time adapting to how things were operating at a smaller scale studio. So the next step that made sense to me was a AA studio. So it was what I saw as a good in between, right? A mobile studio and a big AAA studio. The project that I was being hired for, which I cannot talk about, excited the crap out of me. The position being offered to me was perfect for what I was looking for in terms of career growth. And when interviewing the panel and people I met, they were phenomenal. And it felt like I belonged, working alongside them. So the 4-day work week was a 32-hour per week. It was not 40 hours, like 10-hour days, 4 days a week. It was only 4 days, 8 hours, so 32 hours, right? No reduced salary. You're getting many more perks than like what a smaller studio was getting, but not as many perks as a AAA studio. For me personally, I'm at a point in my life right now where time is most valuable currency in my life. My wife had just recently moved into a role which was also 4 days, 4-day work week, and we were going to have our Fridays together, happy wife, happy life type of thing, right? So this situation kind of came in at a perfect time, and in a time where our life felt like we needed to focus a lot more on our mental health and work-life balance. There was huge appeal, right, for us to do appointments and chores and or have the option to just relax on a Friday so that we had energy for Saturday and Sundays with our family and friends. So those were all things that, like, at the time we were like, yes, like this is perfect. This is what we want. So right away, I'll share with you some of my early impressions right away when I joined the studio. The project was in an exciting part of the cycle in terms of its production. The team was extremely talented. The studio was thriving at that time. Tons of projects were in the works. Lots of different variety of projects as well, which was super exciting. And you can hear the hustle and bustle of the studio, the excitement of the growth of the studio. The renovations were happening for expansion of the studio space. It was extremely exciting times. There was this culture in the studio of like listening to the employees, and that was what led, in the first place, the studio switching to a 4-day work week, was from listening to the employees of the studio. So early on, this was just like, it felt like I joined a dream situation. Now in this section, I'm going to talk more about the day-to-day, like how that actually felt in a 4-day work week. So again, I'm going to reiterate, it was legitimately 8 hours, 32-hour weeks. Okay. There was this question that early on when I joined the studio that I kept feeling like this can't be real, right? So I had this question of like, was Friday really a day off? And I needed to kind of get that sense right away. So I was sussing out for a good month, emails and Slack messages were all unanswered until Monday. And if they were coming in on Fridays, like people, unless it was like urgent, but there was nothing that was urgent unless it was like ridiculously urgent, people would be waiting until Monday. And Fridays would be pretty quiet, at least on my end. Did I feel more focused or just more rushed? And the answer to that question was, it was both. I had to be focused when working, especially early on. I was taught that meetings can get really expensive. If you had multiple directors and execs in a room, understand the cost of that and make sure that there is an agenda, a reason, and what is the expected outcome of your scheduled meetings. Because we were a legit 32-hour work week, it felt like a sprint, right? From Monday to Thursday, it was just like go, 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 get your work done. Am I going to sit here and say some people didn't work a couple of hours on a Friday? Of course, there were days here and there when you have a crazy deadline and you were in meetings all day and you just didn't have the time to kind of work on something that you had promised somebody. But from my personal experience, I probably did that a handful of times where, I had to make sure that a presentation that was going to be done on a Monday was like polished and ready to go. So I would spend that time prepping on Fridays. But it was just nice to know that wasn't expected of me. I just did that because I felt like I needed to, if I wanted to nail what I need to do on the Monday. How did the team handle deadlines, collaboration, and meetings? For me, it was quite the adjustment. It was weird having deadlines on Thursdays instead of Fridays, like end of week. Every single time people kept talking about like, hey, this needs to be done by end of week, I was programmed. The end of week was always Fridays, right? But for us, it was always Thursdays. So when it came to collaboration and such, it needed to be well thought out, planned. Like I said, every minute mattered. So there was very little kind of small talk and chit chat. It was very business focused, I felt, while I was there. Any socializing was mostly left for lunchtime and for after hours. Okay, now for this part, I'm going to try and start to share where it started to break down for me. So there were some specific signs that things weren't working for me anymore. Projects were starting to get canceled around the studio, which led to layoffs. Another round, a few months later, of projects got canceled again, followed by more layoffs. My first year at the studio, I had worked on 2 canceled projects, 1 prototype, and the one last project that I worked on. At least from my knowledge, it's still in production. But I was on 4 projects in a span of a year and a half. So it was really tough for me to find my footing and feel stability, which was most important to me at that time for my family. Were there cracks showing in communication or team health? To be honest with you, the studio had amazing communication, at least from my perspective. They were extremely transparent. That leadership culture that they built was absolutely incredible. Like, I have to commend them on that. Overall team health, I felt, was good in general. For the people who weren't too concerned about like risks Like, I felt like those people were extremely happy. But for others who have a lower risk tolerance, there was a sense of anxiety. And I definitely felt the same way. I felt like if there was another round of layoffs, I was going to be on the chopping block and I was going to get laid off. That was a terrible feeling to have. The anxiety, if I was going to be able to provide for my family, and if I had a job the next day, the next week, the next month. So why did this kind of all happen, right? Mostly all these layoffs and the studio funding issues, there's a few factors, right? First off, the gaming landscape has shifted completely after COVID, right? People just aren't playing games as much anymore. People aren't spending as much anymore, right? The downturn of the economy, right? Publishers are taking less risks due to underperformance of game sales, and they just don't want to be pouring millions and millions of dollars not knowing if that is going to be a good return for them. And all that has led to where the game industry is now, where we just heard 9,000 layoffs happen over at Microsoft, and then 400 at EA. All these big studios are going through layoffs, so it's tough right now. We're in a very unstable time. Okay, so now let's talk about the decision to leave. The last 6 months, of my time at the studio, I had worked so hard to help secure a project for the studio. But even accomplishing that, I had felt anxiety of losing my job. Even though I was told multiple times I played a huge part in the success of the future of that project. I just couldn't shake that anxiety of, will I have a job tomorrow? I felt like I was not in control of my future. We were partners with a developer, but technically they were our boss, but they also have a boss. So there was this like 3-layered management that just scared me. So the turning point for me, when I knew it was time to leave, was when I had secured an offer at EA, which is my current role now. When I met the team, I knew which part of the project I was going to be joining. But if I'm being honest here, if I hadn't received that offer and I didn't vibe with the team and I didn't like the project that I was jumping on, or the part of that project that I was jumping on, I don't think I would have taken the risk, and I probably would have stayed, honestly, at the 40 Workweek studio. It needed to be the right fit for me. And so when I did a lot of deeper thinking and I realized that this was the right opportunity for me, that was when I finally made that jump. I just felt like the position that I'm currently in right now was what I needed to do in this phase of my career. It was a tough decision. I had always dreamed of wanting to work at a 4-day work studio. The types of games that were being made at the studio were games that I loved growing up and playing even today. The culture at the studio was absolutely amazing. Again, like I was saying, it was a good in-between single A studio and a triple A studio, right? Making a double A studio. So yeah, it was tough. I was trading away time, which was the thing that I still value the most, for stability and mental health. But I felt like, okay, I get to spend the extra day relaxing on a Friday, but the anxiety was always leaking into that day, when I'm supposed to be enjoying my time with my wife, family, and friends. Okay, so let's talk about, what's next, what I learned. So, was it the right decision? For me, it definitely was. Ever since my move, I had no more anxiety about my job security. which is crazy to say, especially in this space that we're in right now in the gamers industry. To be able to even say that sentence is absolutely ridiculous. And there's always let's be real here, no one is ever really secured, right? So just saying that, but there's definitely a sense of security where I'm at right now. I do get curious to see the project that I was working on, where it's at, how it's going, how it's looking, because I think it's going to be absolutely amazing. And I honestly can't wait to see the final product when it finally ships, and congratulate my previous team on the hard work and the amazing work that they're doing for that project. Overall, for me, it's been a lot less stressful. What I realize is, even though I'm working 5 days a week, because I am overall less stressed and my mental health is more stable, I get to enjoy more quality time with the important people in my life. Do I still believe in the 4-day work week and the 4-day work model? Does it work? And the answer to that is yes, I do. And I hope one day I am at a level high enough to push for that on my leadership team now. Because I think it's a game changer. It has its pros and cons, but I think with the right balance, it can do incredible things. What I would tell someone considering a 4-day work week setup, I think right away, you need to set expectations correctly. Let the team try it out, do a pilot program, and then let the people make a decision afterwards if it's the best fit for the team. Another thing is be stern on the policy and rules. Is it 10 hours over 4 days? If there is a holiday on a Monday, does that mean you work Tuesday to Friday? Or does it mean you have a super short week where it's, Tuesday to Thursdays, which is what my previous studio was doing. So it was absolutely amazing when we had a holiday on a Monday and we were off on a Friday. But what that meant was things were even more condensed. You'd have 3 days to work in that week, and it was absolutely crazy. Those weeks were wild at work. So to wrap this all up, I'm absolutely grateful for the time that I spent there. But leaving for me just made sense. And I have zero regrets in leaving, but I also have zero regrets experiencing that. Because now I can say that I have experienced the 4-day work week and I see the pros and cons of it all. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this was insightful. If you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And I'll see you all again next time. Bye now.